it. As the President has said, we will work with those who want to see improvement.
We are going to leave this and take you live now to the U.S. House as they come in for one vote on extending provisions of the USA Patriot Act. Live coverage now on C-SPAN.
Of the bill.
H.R. 514, a bill to extend expiring provisions of the USA Patriot Improvement and Reauthorization Act of 2005 and Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act of 2004 relating to access to business records, individual terrorists as agents of foreign powers, and roving wiretaps until December 8, 2011.
Question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote.
First and only vote on this Tuesday evening, a bill that the House debated earlier today. This actually extends 3 provisions of the USA Patriot Act through December of this year. We're going to open up our phone lines for the broader question of whether you think the U.S. still needs the Patriot Act. We're going to get some background on it in just a moment, but here are the phone lines. The question is, does the U.S. still need the Patriot Act? The numbers, if you're a Republican, 202-585-3885. Democrats, it's 202-585-3886. Independents and others, 202-585-3887. One vote, 15-minute vote, so we should have plenty of time for your phone calls. Make sure that you mute your television, and if you have called C-SPAN and gotten on the air in the last 30 days, give others a chance to call in this evening and weigh in with their opinion. 15-minute vote. It is a suspension bill, so that means that, well, with all 435 present and voting, or 434 in this case, somewhere around 290 is the number you're looking for passage. We'll get to your calls in just a moment, though, to set the scene for tonight's vote. Some comments from a Capitol Hill reporter who's been covering the debate. Tim Starks of Congressional Quarterly covering the Patriot Act debate in the U.S. House. Why do Republicans want to extend expiring provisions of the Act through early December rather than a long-term reauthorization?
Well, the Republicans involved in this most heavily say that they think we still need more time to decide what needs to be made permanent and how. So, you know, there are various competing proposals out there, not in the House right now, mainly in the Senate, but the House says that it's a new Congress, it's a new committee with new leaders. It's probably a good idea to start from scratch on this and not rush it.
So the bill's being brought up under suspension of the rules today, which requires a 2/3 votes for passage. So are all Republicans in support of renewing these specific provisions?
No, not all of them. I think you'll see, a pretty heavy majority of them be in favor of doing it in the short term. I think the question then becomes what happens in the long term. If you look at some of the Tea Party movement Republicans that came into the Congress this year, some of them do have reservations about the powers that this renewal would give to the federal government, and they have constitutional concerns about them. So it is not unanimous. But if you look at the last extension of this, I think it got more than 300 votes, and that was when there were more Democrats than Republicans. And I don't know that the percentage of Republicans that came in on the Tea Party movement, who are very much opposed to this, will be decisive in any way right now. Maybe later, perhaps. It remains to be seen.
Is there a unified Democratic view on the Patriot Act, on these provisions in particular?
No, there isn't. The Democrats have tended to be more skeptical of the Patriot Act overall, but you don't get 315 or so votes in the House last year unless you have a pretty healthy number of Democrats voting for it. There are a lot of Democrats who are kind of in the blue dog or the moderate strain of things and see this as a national security priority, but you also have a pretty strong element of the Democrats in the House that are sympathetic to civil libertarians and sympathetic to that idea, and think that this is a bit too intrusive.
Chairman Patrick Leahy in the Senate, the Judiciary Committee, is pursuing a longer-term reauthorization of the Patriot Act. Tell us about that and what else we might see in terms of debate on the Senate side.
Well, the Senate now has actually 3 different proposals that are in the mix. The Senate leaders have set up a procedure to make it so those bills can come directly to the floor. Time is running out. They only have until February 28th to decide on this. They only have until the end of next week then in the Senate to do something, and they have not indicated which bill they prefer. The Leahy bill goes through 2013 and restricts some of these provisions, puts additional civil liberties related safeguards on them. There's another proposal by Senator Grassley and some of the other Republicans that would just go ahead and make all of them permanent as currently written. And then there's a proposal that's somewhere maybe in between that is proposed by Senator Feinstein that would also extend it through 2013, but as currently written, and then also add in some expiring provisions that are due to expire next year for the FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act renewal that was done in 2008. So she's somewhere in between. It's unclear as of yet which proposal will win out, and Senate leadership has not indicated their preference.
Tim Starks of Congressional Quarterly with an update on where things stand with the Patriot Act. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
And they are voting, the House is voting now on extending those 3 provisions, the provisions that would give the FBI court-approved access to any tangible thing that's relevant to a terrorism investigation. Also, it would deal with surveillance of suspected so-called lone wolf terrorists, and will renew court-approved roving wiretaps, the so-called library records provision. 15-minute vote on the House floor. You can see we've opened up our phone lines. Your thoughts, and we go first to Dwight in Juneau, Alaska. Dwight, go ahead.
Hello.
You're on the air. Go ahead, Juneau.
Well, I think the Patriot Act in the first place was never patriotic. It's suspended every man, woman, and child in America is now presumed to be guilty of being a terrorist rather than being presumed innocent, the way our law was set up. So the whole thing to me stinks, and I wish they would have never brought it up, and it never happened, but unfortunately we have to deal with it now.
Let's hear next from New York City. Thanks for your comments, Dwight. New York City, Jared on our Democrats line. Hi.
Hi. Yeah, I just want to say I think it's really darkly ironic that they started this session by reading the Constitution and are now extending the Patriot Act, which completely shreds the Fourth Amendment. And as a civil libertarian, I really think that the Patriot Act is an extremely scary piece of legislation that needs to be gotten rid of as soon as possible.
Some of your comments echoed in Dennis Kucinich's comments on the floor during debate earlier. We'll try to show you some of his speech in just a moment or two. 15-minute vote on the House floor, and the only one this evening. Here's Baltimore next on our independent line. Hi to Bob.
Hi, this is Bob. The Patriot Act has gone way too far with the intelligence operations having been entrenched now for 9 years into all of our society. Even hardcore Republicans have got to hate this. This is an affront to capitalism. We have corrupt intelligence officials now, or people abusing their closeness to them, stealing trade secrets, patents, and any sort of intellectual property or planning that innovators, that rugged individualism and capitalism has been all about. And guess who gets targeted? It's the people who actually are most of your researchers for some of our high tech. Your Koreans, your Iranians, you're anyone with a funny Middle Eastern name, and they go ahead and hijack it and send it up to the Fortune 50.
The headline in the Wall Street Journal this afternoon says Tea Party unlikely to derail Patriot Act renewal. I just want to note this programming update for you. At 7 o'clock, we're going to bring you the Tea Party Express, their town hall meeting over at the National Press Club. That's underway at 7. That'll be on our companion network, C-SPAN. Next up is Vero Beach, Florida. Forrest on our Republican line.
Hello?
Hi, Vero Beach. Go ahead.
All right, this is Fort Lauderdale. I'm a Republican conservative.
And my mistake. We have another one. Go ahead. Is this Vince?
Yes.
All right, Vince, go ahead with your comments.
I'm a Republican. I'm a conservative. And this has gone on long enough. It's time for this to end. This infringes on our Constitution, and our families will be turning over in their graves. That's all I have to say.
And now we'll get to Vero Beach. Here's Forrest. Forrest, I think you're there. Is this Louisville, Kentucky? O.C.?
Hello, my name is O.C. Although we must stay mindful of how this may interfere with other countries or how we may interact with other countries, I think in this day and age we need to use whatever technology that we may have invented or made better to keep our country and our people safe.
Thanks for your comments. Next up is Brandon in Bend, Oregon, on our Democrats line. Go ahead, Brandon, go ahead.
Yes, my name is Brandon. I'm calling from Bend, Oregon, and I'm just calling to say that, you know, I'm deeply disappointed that this would be passed by Congress that, you know, read the Constitution, as another caller has mentioned. I believe that, you know, this is violating our Constitution, and people that were Tea Partiers should be outraged that the people they elected to Congress are doing this. We need to respect all parts of the Constitution, and I would consider myself more of a Ron Paul Republican of an independent, and I think all supporters of any history would be disappointed in a continuance of these violations.
We'll see if we can show you some of the comments of Ron Paul during the debate. The headline in the Hill says Kucinich and Sensenbrenner spar over Patriot Act before and during the House debate. We want to start, and we're going to get back to your calls in a moment. We did want to start with some of the comments of Dennis Kucinich during the House floor debate earlier today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Conyers. I certainly appreciate that, and I will, certainly never seek to impugn the feelings of those who say that we have to have the Patriot Act in order to protect our country. We're all patriots here, and we all want America to be protected. But we have to remember our constitutional experience here, and the reason why we have a Fourth Amendment that protects people from not just from unreasonable search and seizure, but from unwarranted intrusion by the government into their lives. When we look at our constitutional experience and all of the efforts that made in the build-up to it, we didn't hear, give me liberty or give me a wiretap. We didn't hear, don't tread on me, but it's okay to spy. What we heard was a ringing declaration about freedom, and it was enshrined in the Constitution. I stood on the floor of the House way back when the Patriot Act came forward, voted against it because I read it, understood that it opened up the door for a broad reach, and possibilities of broad reach by the government into our daily lives. Now, the gentleman from Wisconsin, who's my friend, correctly pointed out earlier the difference between national security letters and the Patriot Act. But it also is true that Section 505 of the Patriot Act gave the government the ability to greatly expand who can issue a national security letter, so much so that nearly 50,000 national security letters were issued by the FBI, and I think the year was 2006. They don't have to use Section 215 of the Patriot Act. They can just invoke the national security letter authority and reach into people's financial records, their medical records, or their reading material. What's happening to our country? Why are we giving up our basic liberties? We need to take a stand here, and this is as good a day as any to take a stand. Many members of Congress, including those supported by my friends in the Tea Party, maintain their goal is to get rid of big government, get government out of their lives. Well, how about the Patriot Act, which has the broadest reach and the deepest reach of government into our daily lives? Shouldn't we be thinking about that? Some want to get government out of health care, some want to get government out of retirement security. How about getting government out of people's bedrooms, out of people's financial records, out of people's medical records? Vote no on extending the Patriot Act.
Congressman Kucinich from the floor debate earlier. In just a moment, we will show you some reaction from Congressman James Sensenbrenner, who supports the renewal of the provisions, again, extension of 3 Patriot Act provisions through December of this year. Let's go to calls again, though. Forrest, waiting patiently there in Vero Beach, Florida. Go ahead with your comments.
Oh, yeah, thanks for getting to me. I just, I think it's amazing that you can have somebody like Dennis Kucinich and Ron Paul agreeing on, just such an important issue. And these guys here, they're the true patriots. They're standing up for our rights and for our Constitution, and we just need to be thankful that we have them in Congress. And And I just can't believe that such an atrocity would be passed, and all in the name of safety, and protection. And I don't want to give up any of my liberties for any semblance of. It's a bad idea, and unfortunately, it looks like it's going to pass again.
Let's hear from Nancy in, is it Norton or are you in Lorton, Virginia, Nancy?
Good evening.
You from Virginia?
Yes, sir.
Okay, go ahead with your comments.
Well, I think that there's a sensible middle in here someplace. Recently, I saw on PBS's Frontline, Dana Priest is working on a program for this fall about the national security state. And I happen to be one of those people who is subject to the Patriot Act, so I assume. And I tell you, if it wasn't for having the FBI eavesdropping on my telephone, I don't know how I would survive all these lying Christians.
Let's hear from Frank in Berlin, Wisconsin. Frank, what are your views on the extension of parts of the Patriot Act?
As a Wisconsinite and as a conservative, and albeit independent conservative, I'm embarrassed that that this is being proposed by so-called conservatives, and particularly sponsored by a congressman from Wisconsin, and probably will be voted in favor of by most, if not all, of our Republican delegation.
Frank, thanks for weighing in. We want to give folks a chance to hear what Jim Sensenbrenner had to say about the legislation earlier today.
Mr. Speaker, there's been a lot said about national security letters. The authority for them was made permanent in 2006 and is not a part of this bill. So we ought to completely forget about the complaints about national security letters. What I will say is that in the 2006 reauthorization of the Patriot Act, there were provisions in to give recipients of a national security letter the right to obtain judicial review. And I'm proud of that fact, because I think whatever constitutional infirmities there were in this part of the Patriot Act were solved. Now, we hear an awful lot about no oversight. The people on the other side of the aisle who are complaining about this had the authority to have oversight hearings. There was only one of them in the last Congress, and you compare that to the 9 subcommittee hearings, 3 full committee hearings, and a full markup that we had in 2006 when this side of the aisle had the majority. The people who have been doing the oversight have been the Republicans, not the Democrats. The people who know this law is making Americans safer are the Republicans, and the Democrats once again are complaining. I yield back.
Congressman Jim Sensenbrenner earlier today debating the bill that extends 3 provisions of the Patriot Act through December of this year. The vote winding down. This is a suspension bill, so somewhere around 290 votes, 2/3 of the House, those present and voting, it will be needed to pass this vote. So let's see if we can get a call or two more before we watch the rest of the vote. In Michigan, Paul on our Republican line.
Hi, how's it going?
Just fine. Go ahead.
Oh, well, I just wanted to say I've been living, America all my life here, and I start to feel like it's more like a Nazi-esque country here with the roving wiretaps, and it just seems that it's going to get out of control if they keep doing what they feel like they're going to do, and just go ahead and just intervene in our lives everywhere they can by just checking on just everyday lives, tasks we're doing, what car we're buying, where we're at. It just seems a bit ridiculous to me.
One more call here to Washington, Marysville, Washington. Hi, Donnie, go ahead.
Hi. My feeling is that it is so anti-American. They claim that this is supposed to provide us security, but I feel like every step is taking it more and more away from us. I don't like the power that's being wielded right now. I don't feel like the American people are being actually represented by those that we've elected, and that's how I feel.
Well, thank you for your comments. Thanks for all the calls. The vote, as you can see, is winding down, and this is the one and only vote this evening. We did want to tell you the White House has issued a statement about the revision of the Patriot Act provisions. The White House issued a statement of administration policy saying they'd like a 3-year extension of the Patriot Act surveillance authorities. As you may recall from that conversation with Tim Starks in our interview, he mentioned the 3 different Senate proposals that are out there. But the House one and only vote, and again, suspension bill, so somewhere around 290 votes needed for passage this evening. You're watching live House coverage here on C-SPAN.
On this vote, the yeas are 277, the nays are 148. Two-thirds not being in the affirmative, the rules are not suspended, and the bill is not passed. For what purpose, the gentleman from California, Ron?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the chair of each committee be permitted to submit their respective committee rules for publication in the congressional record, and that the chair of the Committee on the Budget be permitted to submit material related.
Gentleman will suspend. The gentleman will suspend. House is not in order.
It's really not that important. I mean, we just got to get it on the record here.
House is not in order. Members will take their conversations off the House floor. House is not in order. Will members take their conversations off the floor, please? House is not in order. House is not in order. Will members please take their personal conversations off the House floor? From California.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I appreciate it. I'll try again. I ask unanimous consent that the chair of each committee be permitted to submit their respective committee rules for publication in the congressional record, and that the chair of the Committee on the Budget be permitted to submit material related to the budget process for publication in the congressional record.
Section so ordered. Gentleman from California.
So go ahead. And Madam Speaker, I send to the desk 2 privilege reports from the Committee on Rules for filing under the rule.
What do I say to them? The clerk will report the titles. Clerk will report the titles.
Report to accompany House Resolution 72, resolution directing certain standing committees to inventory and review existing, pending, and proposed regulations and orders from agencies of the federal government, particularly with respect to their effect on jobs and economic growth. Report to accompany House Resolution 73, resolution providing for consideration of the resolution House Resolution 72, directing certain standing committees to inventory and review existing, pending, and proposed regulations and orders from agencies of the federal government, particularly with respect to their effect on jobs and the economic growth.
Referred to the House calendar and ordered printed.
Thank you very much,
Madam
Speaker.
Ready to go? Pursuant to 22 U.S.C. 3003 in the order of the House of January 5, 2011, Chair announces the Speaker's appointment of the following members of the House to the Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe.
Mr. Smith of New Jersey, Chairman. Mr. Pitts of Pennsylvania. Mr. Adderholt of Alabama. And Mr. Gingrey of Georgia.
Pursuant to Section 4 of the Ronald Reagan Centennial Commission Act of 2009, PL 11125, in the order of the House of January 5, 2011, the Chair announces the Speaker's appointment of the following member of the House to the Ronald Reagan Centennial Commission.
Mr. Schock of Illinois.
Chair lays before the House the following personal requests.
Leaves of absence requested for Mr. Crawford of Arkansas for today and Mr. Hanna of New York for today.
Without objection, the requests are granted. The chair will entertain requests for 1 minute. For what purposes, gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
Madam Speaker, request unanimous consent to address.
Without objections.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, last week, at the same time that oil broke $100 a barrel, the President traveled to the 5th District of Pennsylvania, home of the first oil well 151 years ago, and to the world's largest natural gas play. It was an honor to have President Obama visit the Commonwealth and highlight the research being done in Penn State on energy efficiency. I was hopeful the President would touch on the importance of domestic energy production, especially oil, coal, and natural gas, just as each is critical to any credible energy plan. Unfortunately, I remain convinced that America lacks a comprehensive plan to end our reliance on foreign oil. In too many instances, this administration has undermined America's path to a comprehensive plan. This administration has withdrawn oil and gas leases in the West, imposed a moratorium on drilling in the Gulf, placed huge portions of the Outer Continental Shelf off limits to new offshore drilling, and proposed billions in higher taxes on American energy. These actions will not help cease America's dangerous reliance on foreign oil. Our nation needs a low-cost energy supply for economic growth and security. I hope my colleagues on both sides of the aisle will join me in that effort, and I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Will members in the chamber please take their personal conversations off the House floor so that we may hear the 1 minute of our colleagues. Gentlemen, for what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana rise? Without objection, the gentleman from Indiana is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, as a follow-up to what was just said by my colleague from Pennsylvania, we all know about the problems in the Middle East. There's a real problem in Egypt. We don't know about that government, how it's going to turn out. There's problems in the Gulf states. There's problems in other parts of the Middle East, and we get at least 30% of our energy from that area. We also get about 20% of our energy from Venezuela, and the president down there, Mr. Chavez, is no friend of ours. Now, if we don't move toward energy independence, and there's a real problem in the Middle East, we've got problems here in this country. Can you imagine what would happen if we had 30% of our energy cut off because there was a blockage of the Suez Canal or the Straits of Hormuz, the Persian Gulf? We must move toward energy independence, and the President is blocking us from getting permits to drill in the Gulf. We can't drill in the Anwar. We can't drill off the continental shelf. We can't use coal shale to produce oil. We have enough energy in this country to move to energy independence in 10 years with natural gas and these other fossil fuels. But the President will not move. We're not going to solve this problem with windmills and solar energy. We've got to solve it with the energy that we have before us right now. It's in our national security and our economic security that we ought to do this.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Michigan rise?
1 minute, revise and extend.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, during the Super Bowl, Chrysler aired an ad promoting the new Chrysler 200 that touched the hearts of America with its focus on redemption and the enduring spirit of a great American city, Detroit, Michigan. The redemption of a city and a region that has made some mistakes but is also home to some of our nation's greatest innovators, the best workforce, skilled craftsmen. The redemption of an industry that has also made some mistakes but is still the backbone of American manufacturing. Redemption epitomized by the workers at Chrysler's Sterling Heights Assembly Plant in Sterling Heights, Michigan, which was slated to close during bankruptcy. But the workers fought and sacrificed and made the business case that they were the right people to build the Chrysler 200 featured in the ad. In Detroit, we build things. That is what we do. And we do it better than anybody else in the world. We still have a long way to go, but the Detroit region is coming back, and our story of redemption is distinctly American. Mr. Speaker, to all Americans who are looking to buy a new car and who are considering imports, I have a simple message. If you want the best, you should buy it, imported from Detroit. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. For what reason does the gentlewoman from North Carolina rise?
Permission to address the House for 1 minute, Mr. Speaker, and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't often talk about sports on the floor of the House, but sometimes a player, team, or coach's actions are so exemplary that they must be recognized. Such is the case with Wake Forest University baseball coach Tom Walter. This week, Coach Walter, in an act of profound personal sacrifice, donated one of his kidneys to Kevin Jordan, a freshman player on his team. Kevin Jordan suffered with failing kidneys, and a donation was his only hope for a normal life. And before he even had a chance to swing his bat for Wake Forest, his coach stepped up and changed his life by offering one of his own kidneys. This is not your everyday take one for the team story. Rather, this is the story of a man of great character and generosity, taking initiative to improve the life of a promising young man like Kevin Jordan. I want to wish both Kevin and Coach Walter a speedy recovery from their transplant surgeries and hope to see them one day soon on the ball diamond, winning games for Wake Forest. Coach Walter's example is more than inspirational. It's the very image of a life lived well, of putting others first. His family, his players, his friends, and his community could not ask for a better man to call their own. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. For what purpose does our fellow delegate from Minnesota rise?
Yes, unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute. Revised consent.
Without objection, the gentleman from Minnesota has 1 minute.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Later this week, I plan on introducing legislation, the Patients' Freedom to Choose Act, along with Senator Kay Bailey Hutchinson from Texas. This legislation will repeal 2 provisions of the new health care law that limit a patient's choice on how to use their consumer-directed health care plans. Because beginning in 2013, contributions to flexible spending accounts will be limited by a new federal cap of $2,500. The new health care law will also prohibit individuals from using their health care savings accounts and their flexible spending accounts to purchase over-the-counter medication without a prescription from their doctor. Mr. Speaker, 10 million Americans now are enrolled in HSAs, and over 35 million people have FSAs, while 85% of all large employers offer them as a benefit to their employees. This legislation is needed because these 2 provisions in the health care law will punish families at a cost of over $5 billion. Instead of limiting options, as is happening under this new health care law, we should be empowering patients by giving them increased access to affordable, quality care. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas seek to be recognized? Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I have a sense of humor, and I believe in the First Amendment. And I truly believe that many Americans had a great time either participating at the Super Bowl or maybe fellowshipping with family members. It's a great opportunity to share information and to inspire. That's why I'm so disappointed with the Pepsi advertisement that showed a demeaning role for African-American women in an ad that showed a can being thrown and being utilized to wound someone else or hit someone else, and that individual fell to the ground. In this month of African-American history, where we're trying to celebrate what is good and great, it certainly seems ridiculous that Pepsi would utilize this kind of humor. It was not humorous. It was demeaning. An African-American woman throwing something at an African-American male and winding up hitting a Caucasian woman. I think that we can come together in a much better way, sell Pepsi, and as well talk about good nutrition. But frankly, I consider this insulting, and so did many other women of all colors. It'd be great to have a lot more women in ads at the Super Bowl, more women involved. But it also would be great to have a sense of balance that would respect individuals for who they are and how they contribute. Great women like the Honorable Barbara Jordan and the Honorable Shirley Chisholm. I think even though they probably had a great sense of humor, they'd find this very offensive. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. For what reason does the man from Pennsylvania rise to be?
1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in order to share the feedback that I received from my constituents during my past week in the district. At a town hall meeting on Thursday night, I asked those in attendance to raise their hand if they felt they had a better life than their parents. Nearly everyone raised their hand. But when I asked if they believed that their grandchildren could look forward to a more promising future, not one person raised their hand. Not one person. That's simply unacceptable. While this House has taken positive steps to address the out-of-control spending habits of this government, my constituents strongly feel that the best way to create a brighter future for our children and grandchildren is to cut spending, end government waste, and allow our economy to have the freedom to grow and create jobs. I thank everyone who has shared their thoughts and opinions with me over the past week and month, and I look forward to continuing our constructive dialogue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purposes does the gentleman from California seek to be recognized? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in commemorating President Ronald Reagan's centennial. President Reagan served as an inspiration for an entire generation of us to get involved in politics, and I first had the honor of meeting Ronald Reagan as a young student in California. And in fact, this meeting led to my getting active in Youth for Reagan. And he had a powerful message of economic freedom and limited government, yet it was his ability to translate powerful messages like this into real reforms that set him apart from past leaders. At the heart of all Reagan's policies, from supply-side economics to promoting democracy overseas, was the importance of the individual, not the collective. It was the importance of freedom, not statism. And this great legacy is what we celebrate today. And I remember following the Carter administration, our economy was in a state of economic malaise, high unemployment, high inflation. In fact, that legacy led to the creation of the concept of the misery index, inflation plus unemployment, and that reached an all-time high. But through the enactment of a pro-growth agenda, Reagan was able to cut that number in half in that era of stagflation and lead us into prosperity. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Are there any further requests for 1 minute? Seeing none, under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5th, 2011, the gentleman from California, Mr. Dreyer, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee from the Majority Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Objection.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. I've taken this time out this evening so that my colleagues and I might have the opportunity to talk about what took place day before yesterday and the century that led up to it. I'm referring, as my friend from Fullerton, Mr. Royce, just did, to the 100th anniversary of the birth of Ronald Wilson Reagan. We know that Ronald Reagan is an individual who has provided inspiration to Democrats and Republicans alike. And there is a reason for that. The reason is that while not everyone agreed with Ronald Reagan's policies, he was an individual who was able to provide encouragement. He was an individual who was able to provide inspiration. And I think most important, Mr. Speaker, he was an individual who was able to provide hope to so many people all over this country as well as across the globe. Mrs. Reagan did an interview this past week leading up to February 6th in which she was asked the question, what do you most want your husband to be remembered for? And what she said was that she wanted him to be remembered for the fact that he instilled a sense of optimism for the American people. That great sense of optimism which was not Pollyanna-like, because he was clearly very realistic, direct, had a great strength of character, an unwavering commitment to his principles, but at the same time, he was always able to encourage people to have hope for the future. In fact, one of the great things that the Ronald Reagan Foundation has done, as we all know, Mr. Speaker, and we see it on a regular basis right down this hallway into the great rotunda of the Capitol, and it is there due in large part to the now distinguished chair of the Committee on Administration, Mr. Lundgren, who worked on this statue, and I was honored that he consulted me on a few occasions as he was working on it. But the thing that is, to me, the most important part of the statue is inscribed at the base. And unfortunately, it has to be on the back, so you have to go to a little effort to see it, Mr. Speaker. But at the base of that statue, it has three of the great statements that Ronald Reagan was known for. What were they? They were, of course, America's best days are yet to come, our proudest moments are yet to be, our most glorious achievements are just ahead. Now, if that doesn't instill optimism and encouragement, I don't know what does. But those three statements, Mr. Speaker, I believe define Ronald Reagan. He obviously was someone who enjoyed having a good time. In fact, Nancy said on Sunday at the party that her husband always enjoyed celebrating his birthday, and he would have loved the party that took place. And for those who may not have been there or seen it, you should know that the celebration continues. It actually began at the end of last year. I was privileged to give an address up at the library in which I was talking about the challenges that exist today and the way that Ronald Reagan dealt with many of the similar problems that we face today. And then on New Year's Day, the Rose Parade featured a float marking the 100th anniversary of Ronald Reagan's birth. And then again, this past weekend, on February 5th and 6th, there was great activities that took place at the library. And I should say the weekend before, there was a wonderful opportunity for us to have the members of Congress who were elected in 1980 with Ronald Reagan 3 decades ago to convene for a class reunion that the Ronald Reagan Foundation helped us put together, and at the same time, the Heritage Foundation hosted its meeting, which included many of the newly elected members of Congress. And it was basically a 2.5-day gathering, and several members have told me that the opportunity to have members of that 97th class, the class of 1980, who came in with Ronald Reagan, share their experiences with the newly elected members, 87 strong, the largest turnover in 3/4 of a century. We were able to share those experiences, and members have said that it was probably the highlight of that 2.5-day gathering that we had at the Ronald Reagan Library. I also have to say, Mr. Speaker, that just yesterday we saw the opening of the new Ronald Reagan Museum. And that museum is an amazing facility. Now remember, the Air Force One, the aircraft that Ronald Reagan flew, including Marine One, are both there at the library. And this museum, which has been renovated over the past year or so, was reopened. And I said at one of the gatherings that anyone who had the opportunity to know Ronald Reagan, work with Ronald Reagan, would have had clearly at least one occasion as they went through the library to have a wonderful memory come back to the forefront. And even new experiences. In fact, I had a very moving experience when I went through the museum and saw something that I had not seen before. One of my closest family friends lost his father. His father passed away just before he was born. In fact, 4 months before he was born. He was an only son and obviously never knew his father. And as I walked through the Reagan Museum, I was struck because I saw on the wall the discharge papers that were signed by Captain Ronald Reagan. And when I saw them, I took out my telephone and called my friend and said, "Did you know that Ronald Reagan had signed your father's discharge papers?" He said no, he didn't know it, and was, needless to say, very emotional, having just learned that at that moment as I went in. Well, this man is going to, on March 20th, mark his 50th birthday, and his name is John Clark Gable. His father was the legendary actor Clark Gable, who'd had his discharge papers signed by Captain Ronald Reagan. And as you look at the good and the bad, which are outlined in this museum, including the very tragic day in March of 1981 when an assassination attempt was launched against President Reagan, to lots of exciting and fun times that took place during that period of time. And of course, we all know Ronald Reagan's legendary sense of humor. One of the stories, and I'm happy that my friend from Huntington Beach, whom I met when he was working for Ronald Reagan shortly after we came to Washington together in the early 1980s, my friend Mr. Rohrbacher likes to take credit for many of President Reagan's funny lines, and you know, there's a raging debate that he and I have on that on a regular basis. But one story that I know Ronald Reagan enjoyed, but did not, in fact, get from Dana Rohrbacher, I should say for the record, Mr. Speaker, was when we were dealing with one of the most challenging economic times that the United States of America has gone through. It was the early 1980s. And I was invited on a Saturday afternoon to a small party in Los Angeles. There were about 20 people gathered, and the people gathered were commiserating over the fact that we had, at that point, an unemployment rate that was well into double digits. We had an inflation rate that was sky high, and interest rates were in excess of 15%. And so, naturally, everyone was focused on this. And President Reagan stood up after lunch and said, the other day somebody asked me how I was doing, and he said, I've never been better. Well, needless to say, everyone at this lunch looked around like, how in the world could he say that? He said, the reason I say that is that I'm reminded of this huge caravan of farm animals being driven through a countryside, and there is this terrible accident. These animals strewn all over the highway. And the sheriff came roaring up, and he looked to the side of the road and saw a horse with two broken legs frothing at the mouth. So the sheriff pulled out his gun, put it to the horse's head, and put him out of his misery. And then he looked over and saw a dog, just about the same thing. This dog was shaking like there was no tomorrow, and so he put his gun to the dog's head and put him out of his misery. And then he looked over and saw the driver of one of the vehicles. This driver had at least one leg broken, badly bloodied and banged up, and the sheriff looked at the driver and said, and how are you feeling? And the driver responded by saying, I've never been better. And that, in fact, Mr. Speaker, demonstrated that great sense of optimism and hope that was always there for Ronald Reagan. Now, his policies are something that are desperately needed today, and I'm so happy to see that as we have now won what would be like a Reagan-like majority here in the House, that working together in a bipartisan way, which was a message that former Secretary of Treasury, former Chief of Staff, former Secretary of State James Baker provided Sunday morning at the Reagan Library, working together in a bipartisan way to deal with our nation's problems and the problems that we're dealing with around the globe is a very important thing. And that's why, as we look at the economic challenges, it seems to me that following what I like to describe as the Kennedy-Reagan economic model would be a great prescription for us to create jobs and get our economy back on track. And it seems to me, Mr. Speaker, that as we look at where it is that we're going, making sure that we have tax rates that encourage job creation and economic growth are important. Thanks due to the fact that Japan has just reduced its top rate on job creators, the United States of America today has the highest tax rate on job creators of any country in the world. We have the highest tax rate of any country in the world when it comes to those businesses that are trying to create jobs. We continue to hear and decry the flight of jobs outside of the United States to other parts of the world. And people get into so many other issues. We need to look at our policies that encourage the flight of those jobs outside of the country. And I will tell you that if Ronald Reagan were President of the United States, I have no doubt that he would be championing the notion of reducing that top corporate tax rate. And I have to say, Mr. Speaker, that I was very gratified that right behind me, just 10 days ago, President Obama stood here and advocated a reduction of that top rate on those job creators. And we know that he has recently, President Obama, read Lou Cannon's book on Ronald Reagan and understands how successful Ronald Reagan was. Now, I have lots of things that I want to say, but I'm privileged to be joined by 4 great Californians who are here right now, and so I think that the most appropriate thing for me to do would be to go by both age and seniority. And so I think that my friend Dan Lundgren, who has been an inspiration to me, as Ronald Reagan was, has joined us, and I mentioned him earlier. He's the distinguished chair of the Committee on Administration, something that we were never able to do during the Reagan years, that being have the majority, and I know that Ronald Reagan would be very proud to see his friend Dan Lundgren in the position that he is today. And, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield to my friend.
I thank the gentleman from California for taking this time and for yielding